The moment you open your mouth to defend yourself, you've already lost. Picture this: you're in a meeting. Someone challenges your decision. Your heart races. Heat floods your chest. Your brain scrambles for the perfect comeback, the logical explanation that will prove them wrong. And in that split second, as words rush to your lips, you make the fatal mistake that strips you of every ounce of power you had. You explain. But what you've actually done is far more devastating than you realize. You've just broadcast to everyone in that room, "I accept your authority to judge me. I recognize your right to question me. I am below you in this hierarchy." You've walked into an invisible courtroom where you're the defendant, and they never even had to announce themselves as the judge. Here's what Niccolò Machiavelli understood 5 centuries ago that most people still don't grasp: authority doesn't defend. Authority doesn't explain. Authority simply exists. When a king walks into a room, he doesn't justify his presence. When a CEO faces criticism, she doesn't scramble to prove her worth. And when someone with real power is attacked, they do something that feels counterintuitive, uncomfortable, almost impossible. They say nothing. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you 5 Machiavellian techniques that will completely flip the power dynamic in any confrontation. You'll learn why silence is the sharpest weapon in your arsenal, how to use strategic ambiguity to make others reveal themselves, and the shadow work that transforms you from someone who defends their authority to someone who simply embodies it. This matters now because we live in a world that's obsessed with explanation, transparency, and constant communication. And in that noise, the person who masters silence becomes untouchable. So why do you do this? Why is your first instinct, when challenged, to flood the zone with explanations and justifications? You're 4 years old. Maybe 5. You did something, broke a vase, spoke out of turn, forgot to clean your room. And there's an adult looming over you. Parent. Teacher. Authority. You learned a simple equation: explain yourself equals avoid punishment. Stay silent equals suffer consequences. So you explained. You pleaded. You justified. And sometimes it worked. The punishment softened. The anger dissipated. Your little brain filed that away: defense equals survival. You're 6. Teacher asks why you didn't do your homework. You explain. You're 8. Coach questions your effort. You defend. You're 12. Parents challenge your decision. You justify. You're 25. Boss doubts your competence. You scramble for proof. You're 40. Partner questions your judgment. You launch into explanation mode. The problem? You grew up. But your psyche didn't. Your subconscious still sees authority figures everywhere. Anyone who questions you becomes that towering adult from childhood. And unconsciously, automatically, you drop into that defensive crouch. When you defend, you're saying, "You have the right to judge me. I recognize your superiority. Please accept my submission." Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "Men judge more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see but few can feel." Translation? People don't respond to your explanations. They respond to what they perceive. And when they see you defending yourself, they perceive weakness, regardless of how logical your explanation is. In the invisible hierarchy of every interaction, there's high-status behavior and low-status behavior. High status, calm. Brief. Unshakable. Doesn't need your approval. Low status, eager to explain. Desperate to be understood. Needs validation. Every time you defend yourself, you're broadcasting, "I'm low status. You have power over me." You've given them the key to your house. And they didn't even have to knock down the door, you opened it and invited them in. Here's what you need to understand about power dynamics that changes everything: the courtroom only exists if you walk into it. When someone attacks you, questions you, or challenges your authority, they're not actually seeking information. They're running a test. They're scanning to see if you'll accept the frame they're trying to impose. The frame is this: I am the judge. You are the defendant. Now explain yourself. Your attacker isn't looking for your answer. They're looking for your reaction. Will you defend? Will you justify? Will you scramble? Because the moment you do, they've won. Not through superior logic. Not through better arguments. Through frame control. Imagine a CEO in her boardroom. An intern, fresh out of college, 3 weeks on the job, raises his hand and says, "I'm not sure you understand the market dynamics here. Can you explain your strategy?" Does the CEO launch into a detailed explanation? Does she prove her expertise with charts and data? No. She might smile slightly. She might pause. She might say, "We'll talk about that later." Or she says nothing at all and continues with the meeting. Why? Because the question itself was inappropriate. It carried an implicit claim of equal standing. And by refusing to engage with the premise, she maintains the actual power structure. Every time you defend yourself, you're unconsciously transmitting, "I accept your authority to question me." Think about middle managers versus executives. Middle managers explain their decisions constantly. "Here's why I did this. Here's the data that supports it. Here's what I was thinking." Executives? They make statements. "This is what we're doing." End of discussion. Explanation strips authority. Silence preserves it. Here's what's happening in your brain when you're attacked. Your amygdala, the ancient threat detection system, perceives the challenge as a social threat. Cortisol floods your system. Your fight-or-flight response kicks in. In our tribal past, being challenged by the group meant potential exile. Exile meant death. So your brain screams, "Defend yourself. Prove your value. Don't get kicked out." But here's the twist: in modern power games, defending yourself is what gets you pexiled from the realm of authority. It's the behavior that marks you as prey, not predator. Technique number 1. The strategic pause, the 3-second power gap. This is the foundational technique that Machiavelli himself would have recognized instantly. When attacked, questioned, or challenged, you don't respond immediately. You pause. 3 seconds minimum. Someone says, "I don't think you're qualified to make that decision." What makes you think you know better than the team? The old you would say, "Well, actually, I have 7 years of experience in this field, and if you look at the data from our last 3 projects, you'll see that my approach increased efficiency by 23%, and furthermore, I've been working closely with the stakeholders who specifically requested this direction, so I'm confident that." Label it defensive, eager, weak. Now imagine the Machiavellian approach. You pause. You look at them directly. 3 full seconds. Eye contact unwavering. Then, the decision stands. Or even simpler, you smile slightly, say nothing, and return to what you were doing. What have you just done? First, that 3-second pause created massive psychological tension. Most people cannot tolerate silence, it activates their anxiety. They start second-guessing themselves. Why isn't he responding? Does he think I'm stupid? Did I overstep? Second, by refusing to defend, you've rejected their frame. You didn't accept the premise that you owe them an explanation. You maintained your position in the hierarchy. Here's what happens next. They start defending their challenge. I just think we should discuss it as a team. It's not that I don't trust your judgment, it's just that maybe we could get more input. Watch how the power reversed. They're now the ones explaining themselves. They're the ones seeking approval. They're the ones uncomfortable in the silence. The broader truth, whoever tolerates silence longer holds the power. Robert Greene's law from the 48 Laws of Power states, always say less than necessary. The more you say, the more common you appear. The more you explain, the weaker you look. Silence is not the absence of communication, it's the most powerful communication of all. It says, I am secure. I am unmoved. I don't need your validation. Technique number 2. The Ambiguity Shield, strategic vagueness as armor. This technique involves responding without actually revealing anything. You speak, but your words are deliberately non-committal, vague, and impossible to use against you. Someone says, so are you going to implement the changes we discussed, or are you ignoring the feedback? The old you would say, I'm definitely taking the feedback into consideration, and I've already started working on incorporating some of the suggestions, particularly the ones about workflow optimization, though I do think some of the concerns about timeline might be a bit premature because. Label it, over-explaining. Revealing your hand. Weak. Now the Machiavellian approach. I'm handling it. If pressed, things are progressing as they should. If they push harder, you'll see soon enough. What have you just done? You've created what Machiavelli called strategic ambiguity. You acknowledge the question without giving them any information they can use to attack, predict, or counter your moves. This is critical. The person who controls information controls the narrative. By being vague, you force them to fill in the blanks, and people almost always project strength onto ambiguity, not weakness. Here's what happens. They become increasingly agitated. But I need to know the specifics. When will this be done? What exactly are you planning? And you remain calm when it's ready. Their frustration grows. Your power increases. Why? Because you've demonstrated that you don't owe them transparency. You've refused to explain yourself into a corner where they can pick apart your plans. The broader truth, specificity creates vulnerability. Ambiguity creates invulnerability. Machiavelli wrote, the promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present. Translation, the more specific your commitments, the more trapped you become. Strategic vagueness preserves your freedom to adapt. Vladimir Putin mastered this. Steve Jobs mastered this. They maintained silence about their intentions until the last possible moment, creating suspense and preserving tactical flexibility. Technique number 3. The frame flip, turning the judge into the defendant. This is the most advanced move in the Machiavellian playbook. When someone tries to put you on trial, you don't just refuse the courtroom, you put them on trial instead. Someone says, you seem really defensive. Why are you being so difficult about this simple question? The old you would say, I'm not being defensive. I just think it's unfair to characterize my response that way. I was simply trying to explain my position, and it feels like you're misinterpreting my tone, which is actually frustrating because. Label it, reactive. Justifying. Trapped in their frame. Weak. Now the Machiavellian approach. You pause. Then calmly, why is it important to you that I answer this right now? Or, what are you really asking? Or even, interesting. You seem invested in this. Why? What have you just done? You flipped the frame completely. They were the judge questioning you. Now you're the judge questioning them. This is metacommunication. You're not engaging with their question, you're questioning their right to ask. You've shifted from defending your position to examining their motives. And that shift is devastating. Here's what happens. They suddenly feel exposed. I'm just trying to understand. It's not. I mean, I was just asking because. Watch how they scramble now. You asked the question. They're defending themselves. The entire dynamic reversed. This is Robert Greene's Law 36, disdain things you cannot have, ignoring them is the best revenge. But we're taking it further, you're not just ignoring the attack. You're making the attacker explain themselves. The broader truth, whoever is explaining is losing. In conversation, there's always a metastructure. Someone is the examiner, someone is the examined. Someone sets the frame, someone operates within it. The powerful don't just refuse bad frames, they impose their own. As Machiavelli understood, it is much safer to be feared than loved when, of the two, one must be lacking. Translation, don't seek their approval. Make them seek yours. Technique number 4. The sovereign statement, words without defense. Sometimes silence isn't enough. Sometimes you need to speak. But here's the key, you speak without justification, without explanation, without defense. You make a declaration, not an argument. Someone says, everyone thinks you made the wrong call on the Miller account. Don't you think you should reconsider? The old you would say, well, I understand their concerns, but based on my analysis of the market conditions and the client's specific needs, I determined that this approach would yield better long-term results, even if it doesn't look optimal in the short term, and besides, if you consider the risk factors. Label it, desperate for approval. Over-justifying. Weak. Now the Machiavellian approach. I made the decision I made. Or, the Miller account will proceed as planned. Or, I'm comfortable with my choice. Period. Full stop. No elaboration. What have you just done? You've made a sovereign statement, a declaration that doesn't seek permission or validation. It simply exists, like gravity. The brilliance of this technique is in what it doesn't contain. No justification means no vulnerability. They can't pick apart your reasoning because you haven't given them any. They can't question your logic because you haven't presented any argument to dismantle. Here's what happens. Uncomfortable silence. Then, but don't you want to explain your thinking? No. What they're really asking is, won't you please enter my courtroom so I can cross-examine you? And you're saying, I don't recognize this court's authority. The broader truth, authority declares. Subordinates explain. Think about how different power levels communicate. Entry level, I think maybe we should consider possibly trying this approach if that's okay with everyone. Middle management, here's why this makes sense and how it addresses our concerns. Executive, this is what we're doing. As Jung would say, you cannot shake hands with a clenched fist. But true power doesn't need to shake hands. It simply is. Technique number 5. The paradox of transparency, when admission becomes armor. Here's the nuance that separates tactics from mastery. Sometimes, the most powerful move is to do the opposite of everything I just taught you. Sometimes, you respond with complete, unflinching transparency. This is the exception. The advanced play. The move that shows you've transcended technique and entered true sovereignty. Someone says, you're arrogant. You don't care about anyone's opinion but your own. The old you would say, that's not true. I care deeply about what people think. I'm always listening to feedback and trying to incorporate different perspectives. In fact, just last week I implemented 3 suggestions from the team, so I don't know why you would say that I label it defensive, desperate, weak. Now the Machiavellian approach, the paradox. You pause. Then calmly, sometimes, yes. Sometimes I am arrogant. Sometimes I don't care about other opinions. Or, you're probably right. I can be like that. Or even, guilty as charged. What have you just done? You've weaponized honesty. You've accepted the accusation, not because it wounded you, but because you've already integrated that shadow. You know you're capable of arrogance. You know you sometimes prioritize your own judgment. And here's the devastating truth, you cannot shame someone who has already accepted themselves. This is the psychological principle behind the paradox. Insults only work if they touch an existing wound. If there's no wound. If you've looked at your darkness and said, yes, that's part of me, then the attack has nowhere to land. Here's what happens. Complete disarmament. Your accuser expected defense. They expected denial. They expected you to scramble. Instead, you agreed. Calmly. Without shame. Now they have nowhere to go. The accusation was supposed to hurt you, expose you, diminish you. But you exposed yourself first. You owned it. And in that ownership, you became untouchable. This is where tactics meet philosophy. This is where we leave the shallow waters of technique and dive into the deep psychology that makes a person truly powerful. Carl Jung taught, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Translation, your unintegrated shadows, the parts of yourself you reject and deny, become weapons others can use against you. But when you look at those shadows, when you accept them, when you say, yes, I am capable of being cold, calculating, arrogant, selfish, then no one can weaponize them against you. This is not your default. This is the master move when the accusation touches something you've already integrated. You're dealing with someone who expects traditional defense. The truth is more devastating than any defense would be. You want to demonstrate sovereignty beyond technique. The internal architecture, the shadow work. None of these techniques work if you're still that scared child inside. This is the part most people skip. They want the tactics, the scripts, the clever comebacks. But here's the truth that separates posturing from real power. If you're performing these techniques while internally terrified of rejection, everyone can smell it. The techniques become a mask. And masks are fragile. This is why the real work isn't in the techniques. The real work is internal. Psychological. Spiritual, even. Here's the question that reveals everything. Why does it hurt when they attack you? Think about it. If someone called you a giraffe, you wouldn't be offended. You'd be confused. Because the accusation doesn't match reality. But when they call you arrogant, incompetent, selfish, weak, and you feel something intense, anger, shame, fear, it's because they're touching an existing wound. The insult only hurts if part of you fears it might be true. Jung called these wounded, rejected parts your shadow. The aspects of yourself you can't accept, so you bury them in the unconscious. But here's the devastating consequence: those unintegrated parts become your greatest vulnerabilities. What you reject about yourself becomes the weapon others use against you. Example: you fear you're incompetent, any criticism of your work devastates you. You fear you're selfish, being called selfish triggers defensive scrambling. You fear your unlovable, rejection sends you into spiral. But here's the liberation: you cannot shame someone who has already accepted themselves. So how do you integrate your shadow? How do you transform vulnerabilities into armor? You look directly at your darkness, the parts you've hidden, and you accept them. Not celebrate them. Not act on them without restraint. But accept that you are capable of them. Exercise: complete these sentences honestly. Sometimes I am selfish. Sometimes I am arrogant. Sometimes I am manipulative. Sometimes I am weak. Sometimes I am afraid. When you can say these things, really mean them, and still hold your dignity, that's when you know you've integrated the shadow. And here's the magic: when someone calls you selfish and you've already accepted that you can be selfish, you simply say sometimes, yes. No defensiveness. No shame. The ultimate defense isn't a verbal technique. It's psychological armor. Self-knowledge makes you bulletproof. When you know, truly know, all your capacities for light and darkness, when you've examined your shadows and chosen your values, when you've accepted yourself completely, then no attack can penetrate. Because there's no wound to touch. There's no shame to trigger. There's no secret you're desperately hiding. Transparency becomes armor. Honesty becomes invincibility. This is the shift from fortress to wind. A fortress can be sieged. Walls can be broken. Defenses can fail. But wind? You can't siege wind. You can't break it. You can't even grab it. This is sovereignty. Not the need to defend your position, the simple fact of existing in it, unmoved by external judgment. As Nietzsche wrote, no one can construct for you the bridge upon which precisely you must cross the stream of life, no one but you yourself alone. You're not building defenses anymore. You're not performing power. You are power. And that changes everything. The challenge: the 21-day silence protocol. For the next 21 days, you're going to run an experiment. I call it the silence protocol. This isn't just about learning techniques. This is about rewiring your nervous system's response to perceived threats. This is about breaking the childhood programming that makes you defend yourself every time someone questions you. Here are your 5 non-negotiable rules for the next 21 days. Rule 1: the 3-second pause. Every time someone challenges you, questions you, or attacks you, pause for 3 full seconds before responding. Count them. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. 3 Mississippi. Then decide if you'll respond at all. Rule 2: 0 explanations. Do not explain yourself unless absolutely necessary for clarity. If your answer requires more than 2 sentences, you're justifying. Cut it. Make it a statement, not an argument. Rule 3: no defensive phrasing. Ban these phrases from your vocabulary. Actually, to be honest, if you really think about it, but what I meant was, you have to understand, it's not that I. These are all defensive tells. Delete them. Rule 4: comfortable silence. Practice letting silence exist in conversations. Don't fill every gap. When you've said what you need to say, stop talking. Even if it feels uncomfortable. Especially if it feels uncomfortable. Rule 5, Shadow Journaling. Every day, write down one criticism someone could level at you that would hurt. Then write, sometimes, this is true about me. And sit with that. This is the integration work. This will be uncomfortable. Your nervous system is programmed to scramble when challenged. That programming has been reinforced for years, maybe decades. When you pause instead of defend, your body will scream at you. You'll feel heat rising in your chest. Your heart racing. Anxiety that they'll think you're weak. Panic that silence means agreement. Desperation to explain yourself. This is not failure. This is growth. The discomfort is the old programming dying. Let it die. Days 1 to 7, confusion and resistance. People will be confused by your new behavior. Why aren't you defending yourself? Don't you have anything to say? This is them testing if you'll break. Don't. Days 8 to 14, they test harder. When silence works, some people escalate. They push harder. Make bigger accusations. This is actually a good sign. It means you're not playing the game they expected. Stay calm. Let them exhaust themselves. Days 15 to 21, the shift in treatment. Something fascinating happens around week 3. People start treating you differently. More respect. More deference. They stop questioning you as much. Why? Because your behavior has demonstrated that you don't need their approval. And that makes you magnetic. Days 22 to 30, transformation. By the end of the month, if you've been consistent, the change will be unmistakable. You'll notice you're calmer. Less reactive. More present. And others will orbit you differently, seeking your approval instead of you seeking theirs. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. Every time you pause instead of react, you're teaching your nervous system, we're safe. We don't need to scramble. We don't need their validation to survive. Every time you make a sovereign statement instead of an explanation, you're reinforcing a new identity, I am authority. Not because I proved it. Because I embody it. External behavior shapes internal narrative. When you act like someone who doesn't need to defend themselves, you become someone who doesn't need to defend themselves. And then the magic happens. People start gravitating toward you. Why? Because certainty is magnetic. Desperation repels. When you stop chasing approval, people start chasing yours. Your presence becomes different. Heavier. More substantial. When you walk into a room, people notice. When you speak, people listen. When you're silent, people wait. This isn't manipulation. This isn't performance. This is the natural consequence of integrating your power. The closer, the initiation. Let me tell you something most people never realize. Powerful people are always watching. Not in some paranoid, big brother way. But they're observing. Assessing. Measuring. Your defensiveness? It's not just annoying to them. It's data. It tells them exactly where you sit in the hierarchy. It broadcasts, this person is still seeking approval. This person is controllable. Every time you scramble to explain yourself, every time you over-justify your decisions, every time you let someone's challenge rattle you, you're sending a signal. And that signal determines how you're treated. Here's what happens if you keep doing it wrong. You spend your entire life defending, justifying, proving, exhausting yourself in an endless performance for an audience that will never be satisfied. Because the game is rigged, the more you explain, the less authority you have. But here's what happens if you change. You become untouchable. Not because you're perfect. Not because you never make mistakes. But because you've stopped participating in the courtroom. You've stopped accepting other people's frames. You've integrated your shadows and chosen your sovereignty. This is the fork in the road. One path leads to endless defense. The other leads to true power. Now let me give you permission for something. This isn't about being a sociopath. This isn't about being cold, heartless, or manipulative. This is about being strategic. This is about protecting your energy. This is about recognizing that not every challenge deserves a response, and not every questioner deserves your time. You can be kind without being weak. You can be open without being vulnerable. You can be silent without being dismissive. The Machiavellian approach isn't about hurting people. It's about not letting them hurt you. It's about maintaining your sovereignty in a world that constantly tests it. If this makes you uncomfortable, good. Comfort is the enemy of transformation. If you're completely at ease with everything I've said, you probably don't need it. But if something in you resisted, if you felt that defensive flutter reading this, then pay attention. That flutter is your shadow dying. That discomfort is the old identity recognizing it's about to be replaced. That resistance is the part of you that's terrified of stepping into real power. Let it be uncomfortable. That's how you know it's working. This information is for a specific type of person. This is for the person who's tired of performing. Tired of defending. Tired of justifying their existence to people who will never be satisfied. This is for the person who's ready to stop playing small. Ready to embody their authority instead of begging for permission to have it. This is for the person who recognizes the game and is ready to play it consciously, strategically, powerfully. If that's you, you already know it. You felt it while reading this. That recognition? That's your signal. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe because I need numbers. Subscribe to Mindsplicit Hub if you've made a decision. The decision to stop defending yourself. The decision to integrate your shadows. The decision to become sovereign. This channel isn't for everyone. It's not supposed to be. It's for the people who are ready to do the psychological work that transforms tactics into embodiment. If you want feel-good affirmations, you're in the wrong place. If you want surface-level tricks, there are 1,000 other channels. But if you want depth, if you want transformation, if you're ready to build real, unshakable power from the inside out, then you're exactly where you need to be. Welcome to Mindsplicit Hub. We're not building influencers here. We're building architects of the mind. People who understand that real power isn't in the words you say, it's in the silences you master. People who know that sovereignty isn't something you achieve. It's something you become. Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago. Jung understood it a century ago. And now you understand it too. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you defend yourself the next time someone challenges you? Or will you pause, recognize the frame, and choose silence? The choice is yours. It always has been. Say nothing. Watch them collapse. And claim your power.